Welcome to Saturday versus Sunday. I'm John Barbin, where we talk both college and pro. That's what the sign's all about. And we'll want to talk about the Dallas Cowboys today, and if whether or not Jerry actually might have made the right call trading Micah Parsons. So whoever we talk about gets the shirt today. And, tomorrow they're going to be playing the Eagles, so they're on the wall. All right, so everybody obviously knows Micah Parsons got traded. This was a big controversial thing that the media seemed to want to talk about a lot. I posted about it maybe a month ago before it all happened, and I just posted should pay him or not, and I just wanted to get people's sense of it. And there's a mix of people who said you should pay him, and there's other people, I guess Cowboy fans specifically, weighed in. Some of them said overpaid, not good enough, it was a smart move, trade him, and other people were whatever it takes, pay him. And so there seems to be a divide. There's people on both sides of this fence. So I started thinking, what if, now obviously Jerry Jones is polarizing, kind of whatever he does, some people are going to hate it. Some people, I don't know how many people are going to love it, but there's definitely people who think he's the one holding the Cowboys back. After watching that documentary, it seems as though he'll make significant moves out of spite and ego versus what's best for the team, like firing Jerry Johnson after winning the Super Bowl. Two Super Bowls seems like, why would you do that? Like, everything's working here. So, but then they won another one. So then he's vindicated by that move. So you could see how winning 3 Super Bowls and making a bold move like getting rid of Jimmy Johnson and still winning another one sort of vindicates in his mind that he knows what he's doing. Now, that was 30 years ago, but, and it's the richest franchise in the world. So there are, in his mind, there's data points and there's things he can point to saying, I'm the one who led the charge to get the NFL as rich as it is, because he's the one who fought back against that lawsuit and countersued the NFL and ended up getting all the teams essentially their rights to market their teams the way they want. So you could argue he was the instigator that got the NFL moving in this direction of being as wealthy as it is. And so now he owns the most wealthy franchise in the entire world, sports franchise, bigger than all of the European soccer teams. This is the biggest in the world. So he's done something right there, and he knows that he's done something right there as far as at least growing the size and wealth of his company there, his team. So I would imagine in his mind, it's hard for him to think he'll ever make every move. He probably thinks every move he makes the right move. So not paying Parsons, I've heard it as it could be that he understands that this team isn't ready to win a Super Bowl as currently constructed, and paying Parsons the ridiculous amount that he wanted or that he got. He just understood that's an overpay. And then your detractors would say, well, he probably overpaid for Prescott, and he probably overpaid for Lamb, if not waited too long to pay Lamb. So he could have got Lamb cheaper, probably could have got Prescott cheaper. But, this as one of the narratives, as he kind of waited too long on both of those negotiations, and the price just kept going up. And then that was the same narrative I was hearing for the Parsons thing. Some people who wanted Parsons to stay were thinking you should have paid him right away, but instead Maxx Crosby got his payday, and then Myles Garrett got his payday. So the number and then Jamar Chase, all of these people became the highest non-paid, non-quarterback. And so the number just kept going up every time another one of these big time players got signed, to the point where this negotiation led itself to, well, if his agent can justify his numbers, saying, well, if Myles Garrett got that and Jamar Chase got that, my guy's better than both of those as far as his value to a team. And then the price went up and it was too expensive, so off you go. So then I got thinking, what if the Cowboys are better this year? Or what if the Cowboys' record is better this year, and they actually make the playoffs this year, and they actually win a playoff game this year? Now, obviously, I'm not comparing their record to last year. It's Prescott was out half the year, so that's not really a year to compare it to. But in Parsons' career, he's been in 4 playoff games with the Cowboys, and he's won 1 playoff game, and he's had 1 sack in the playoffs. So some people who are not necessarily on the side of paying Parsons would point to that saying, he's fine, but he stacks up all of his sacks and his statistics are against weaker teams in the regular season. And when it really matters, when you need him to make the play, like where was he? Like how come they, in his tenure at Dallas, they've won one playoff game and he's been in 4. And it's not like he has game-breaking statistics in the playoffs. Okay, fine. So then I started thinking, is that just too much to expect out of a defensive end at all? And is there any data we have showing that spending money on a defensive end is actually one of the key pieces to a Super Bowl type team? And you could make the argument that it isn't. And you could make the argument in recent history that if anything, a defensive tackle is more important, or there's evidence that a defensive tackle, a game-breaking defensive tackle is present on the Super Bowl winning teams of late, but not a top of the league expense defensive end. TJ Watt's been on the Steelers for 8-9 years. He's never even won a playoff game. He's been in 4, and he doesn't even have one playoff win in his career. Myles Garrett's been on the Browns for 8? This is his 9th year maybe, and he has one playoff win in his career. Maxx Crosby, I would put up there as one of the top edge rushers. There's got to be and then Nick Bosa, so that's the 5. Parsons, Crosby, Bosa, Garrett, and TJ Watt. The only one who's been to the Super Bowl with his team is Bosa. So obviously signing those other guys for big dollars, or those other guys being top defense. Well, and then Hutchinson, he's the other that's coming. He will be one of the best. If he could be the best pass rusher coming in this year if he stays healthy. He was on pace for it last year. But none of those teams have had any kind of special playoff success other than the Niners. But some people would argue the Niners were just stacked front to back, and Bosa or no Bosa, that team was a playoff constructed team. But it's not like Garrett has done anything special for the Browns, or maybe the Browns organization is just too dysfunctional and he can't overcome that. But they haven't had a quarterback in 20 years. So, he's without a quarterback, a D end just doesn't matter if you have the best D end or not. Same with Pittsburgh. TJ Watt came along as Ben Roethlisberger was in the twilight of his career and his Super Bowls were over with. So having TJ Watt, Defensive Player of the Year caliber defensive end, completely irrelevant. It has made no difference on Pittsburgh's playoff fortunes. Maxx Crosby, I would put right up there with those guys. Completely irrelevant. Makes no difference on the Raiders' ability to make the playoffs because they don't have a QB. Like, they're just a revolving door of whoever at QB. So maybe the answer actually is you have to have the QB, and a defensive end is just a nice piece, but it's not the answer. And in recent years, on the teams that do have the QB, a defensive end is still not the answer, and it's actually a defensive tackle. And that could be, you could make the argument with the Chiefs. It's Chris Jones that is the, I guess, front 7 player that is the difference maker. I mean, their whole defense is good. They have good cornerback. Like, everyone's good there. But talking about the Hall of Fame player that the other offense has to actually scheme their offense to deal with, Chris Jones is that player on the Chiefs. And he is a defensive tackle. And he is this weird hybrid 6'5", 295 pound tackle that is fast enough to play edge and bendy enough to play edge even a little bit at such a big size. He can do both. So he isn't a normal tackle, but he can play it. He's like a positionless D lineman. You put him wherever you want, on the nose, on the edge, in a traditional tackle spot, and he's unblockable wherever you put him. So he is this different tackle type, right? Like, it's not a standard tackle, like just big, heavy, stuff the run, take up space type tackle. This guy's fast. He's got length, and he can play in and out. So he's a generational type tackle. But given his size and where he normally plays, that's not an edge. That's a tackle. Then Aaron Donald. The Rams won the Super Bowl, and their best player on the entire team was Aaron Donald, who was a defensive tackle. But and in his case, he was not a traditional defensive tackle who's just really big. He he was kind of way undersized. He might. I saw an interview when he said he never played above 265, maybe at tackle, but he was 265 pounds of muscle. There was no excess weight on that body, and he was really, really strong, really, really explosive. And the other team had to game plan specifically for him, and he was double teamed at all times, sometimes triple teamed. So again, we're talking about a generational Hall of Fame caliber talent, but not at edge. At tackle. Again, Aaron Donald could play inside or outside. He could play wherever. I bet you he could play linebacker. He's so good. But he spent most of his time on the interior of the line. So that's two teams who've won the Super Bowl recently, and their best defensive player was not an edge. It was a tackle. Not one of these edges that's demanding just a ridiculous amount of money. Like, can you even name the edges on those teams? So, yeah, and I know Von Miller was there with the Rams, but that's a late in his career rental. But he did play good in that Super Bowl. And Von Miller's the one exception. He obviously was a Super Bowl MVP as an edge with Peyton Manning. But again, in that case, he had a Hall of Fame quarterback that's already won the Super Bowl and been to it multiple times. And then the most recent example is the Philadelphia Eagles, who have their best defensive player. I mean, they've got great defensive players all over that defense. But in the Super Bowl, I mean, that defensive line was outstanding. But you could make the argument, and it would be relatively valid, that Jalen Carter is the best player on that defense. And or at minimum in the front seven, he's the one that sticks out, not the ends. Even though everybody on that team was getting, they're all good. Carter's the one that sticks out. Like, Jalen Carter looks like a slightly, I mean, he's not as tall, but slightly heavier kind of version of Chris Jones. Like, let's say it this way. If Jalen Carter hits his ceiling, it might be a Chris Jones type ceiling by the end of his career. Like, he's got that kind of freakish talent. So again, we're talking about the best player up front being a tackle, not an edge. So maybe the argument just is a defensive end, as disruptive as a defensive end can be. There's no recent example of a high-priced defensive end leading a team anywhere. Just show me the defensive end who's led their team anywhere. Now, the defensive end could be the icing on the cake, but it's not the cake. The cake is the quarterback, not the defensive end. Like, you don't build a team around a defensive end. Obviously, you build it around a quarterback. So maybe this is just Jerry Jones admitting he doesn't have the other pieces, or it could just be his ego. It could just be his ego. So is Parsons that good? Is Parsons good enough to transform a team? Well, you could argue the Packers are one of those teams that has a QB that's shown he might have what it takes to get to the Super Bowl. If it wasn't for that improbable comeback by the Niners 2 years ago, the Packers would have been in that Super Bowl, or at least look like they. It wouldn't have been surprised. It wouldn't have been surprised on that run if they made it to the Super Bowl the way they were playing that year. And also, between these two teams, and I said this on the last time I talked about this. The last time the Cowboys faced the Packers kicked the ever-loving shit out of them in the playoffs. So did this upgrade them? Maybe. If Parsons really is that good of a player to demand that salary, when I say that good of a player, he's the highest paid non-QB. You would think that means he's a difference maker. You would think for that kind of money, if that money translates at all to postseason success, because I don't care about the regular season. You don't pay that much money to just go 9-8 in the regular season and just, well, we beat a bunch of teams in the regular season. You pay that money to try to win the Super Bowl. So if they don't go on a deep run a few times during his time in Green Bay, you could say Jerry made the right move. He resisted paying all that money. He fetched 2 first-round picks, which now the other thing is he needs to do something with those first-round picks to make them worth anything. I know he just signed DaRon Bland to a $90 million deal, and that's the other key component you need on defense is corners. And I think he has 2 great corners, Bland being one of them. So that's probably money well spent at corner. So I don't know. We'll see here. If the Packers really put it together and go on a deep run, and it's clear that Parsons is a major disruptive force on that defense, then maybe it was the right thing for the Packers to do. But what if the Cowboys actually have a good season? What if the Cowboys go on a run in the playoffs? What if the Cowboys meet the Packers in the playoffs and beat them in the playoffs? Uh, what does that say about that trade? What does that say about, like, for people who just despise Jerry Jones, would that not kind of vindicate him? Like, how, if you don't like Jerry Jones, sorry, I think I said Jimmy Jones. If you don't like Jerry Jones, and let's just, if this happens, that the Cowboys make it to the playoffs, they look solid this year, and somehow they meet up with the Packers at one of the rounds in the playoffs and beat them, how insufferable do you think Jones will be after that, if you find him insufferable? Because you know in his head it'll have just vindicated him getting rid of Parsons. So it's interesting. It would be amazing television to see it happen. I know they face each other in the regular season, so we're going to get a little taste of, all right, did this, I know the media will already be talking about it as soon as that game's over. It's like, oh, what does this trade mean? And here it is. Here's the example of one team that gave away Parsons, and now the other, they get to face each other. You get to see what happened there. But there's a non-zero chance that the Cowboys actually have a good season without him. And there are people who have said, like, well, how good were we with him? Didn't seem to really affect your ability to win games in the playoffs. So I know it was his rookie deal, and he's theoretically going to be even better. But as I've just laid out, point to the other team where an over-the-top defensive end, like a defensive end that's winning Defensive Player of the Year, like TJ Watt, it has had no material effect on the Steelers' ability to even win one playoff game. Watt has not won a playoff game in his entire career. So it's, I guess what I'm trying to get at is how much the disproportionate amount that your QB affects the success of your team. And no, it doesn't matter who the defensive end is. You could have the best defensive end in the history of all of football, and it just won't matter if you don't have the QB. I mean, they had the defensive play. Watt was a defensive player of the year, but that didn't do anything. They've done nothing in the playoffs, and I think they're going into their 10th year without winning a playoff game. So is it worth spending any money on? I mean, what has Myles Garrett done for the Browns? I mean, now you could argue the Browns are such a dysfunctional organization, it'll never work. But it's the narrative to me is the icing on the cake is one of those defensive pieces, not the cake. And like I've just expressed, it could be that it's a lights out defensive tackle that's a bigger, more important piece right now in modern NFL, not the edge. Even though the edges look flashy and get the sacks and do all the pass rushing, and I don't know, maybe they're just more visible what they're doing. Maybe the average fan just can't really tell like why a tackle is so good when it's not as easy to see what a good tackle is doing. Like, if you really need to pay attention directly to Aaron Donald the whole game to actually see how he's affecting the game, where it's pretty obvious if Maxx Crosby or Parsons comes flying off the edge and just smokes the quarterback. Like, well, that's obvious. Like, even the untrained eye can tell what happened there. The untrained eye might not be able to tell how Jalen Carter or Chris Jones is utterly disrupting a game from the interior of the line. So maybe that's partly it. I don't know. But the final note here. Okay, so what teams, I guess my last point is, what teams does it make sense to pay an edge rusher? And to me, the only teams that it makes sense to actually fork out the money, like big money, for an edge rusher are teams that have, are teams that have a Super Bowl caliber QB. So that would be Trey Hendrickson and the Bengals, which they finally did. Now, it was just a one-year deal, but I guess Hendrickson was happy with the number he got there. It sounds like that deal got him the same guaranteed money for this year that the long-term deal the Bengals were offering was the same guaranteed money. But in this case, this is just a one-year deal. But the guarantee on the longer deal, which was about $95 million, they were still only going to give him $30 million guaranteed. So it sounds like he got the guarantee, and he's just betting on himself to have a good year and then sign an even bigger deal next year. But in that case, the cake is Joe Burrow, as evidenced by they went to the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow has a winning record against Josh Allen, I think, in the playoffs, and he's one of the only people who's beaten Josh Allen in the playoffs in the AFC, and he was within a few plays of winning the Super Bowl. So you have a Super Bowl caliber QB in Cincinnati. So that's the cake. The icing is Trey Hendrickson, not the other way around. So and perhaps the Lions are that case. Jared Goff has been to a Super Bowl. the offense he's running now in with the Lions looks way more potent than the Rams offense. And so it's likely that you've got the offensive cake there. You've got Goff and an offense that can put the points on the board. And the final piece of that, the icing on the cake is Hutchinson. And if he's healthy this year, he could have a defensive player of the year caliber year. But with that, but without him, they won 15 games. So it's just, it sounds wrong that you could say that you just don't need a great edge rusher to make it all the way and win the Super Bowl. But many of the teams who've been winning the Super Bowl don't have the best edge rusher in the league, or an edge rusher that could command anything like the numbers that these guys are commanding. So I don't know. Let me know what you think. Am I way off on this one, or where do you land on this? What would you say? Would it bother you? Do you even care if the Cowboys actually make the playoffs and maybe win a playoff game without Parsons? Like, what would you think of that? And do you think that Green Bay has to go on a legit run and look like a serious contender for the NFC Championship game, and if not make the NFC Championship game, look damn good along the way in the playoffs to justify the money they just spent? Or would you view it like if Green Bay somehow doesn't make the playoffs, would you view that as a complete disaster of a trade, or it's, that's just 1 year and there's many years to go? I don't know. I'm just curious as to what people think on this one, because the stories are still lingering about, I just saw an article talking about some sources inside the Cowboys team suggested Parsons had kind of lousy energy, and he was sort of with that, that picture of him just lying around on the training table. And I saw a thing saying that Charles Haley would have just flipped him off that table if he was there. So it's just a bad vibe. It's not a professional look. And I don't know, maybe that's not really true, but it's obvious. And some of the comments he made, and also Jerry calling him Michael, was just not, it's just the way that went down was just unprofessional kind of on both sides. But I just wonder what people think do people think this is just makes Green Bay just an obvious Super Bowl contender, or is the jury out and Parsons' presence for 4 years on the Cowboys didn't get them to the NFC Championship? It got the one playoff win. So is it just naive to think it's all of a sudden going to launch the Packers into the Super Bowl? And do people think, given the fact that there was limited playoff success with him in Dallas, do people really think Dallas is going to be any different without him? I don't know. I'm just super curious. I'm curious to see how it's going to go. And that Green Bay game against them in whatever it is, week 4 or 5, I think is going to be so interesting. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Also tomorrow is or I guess by the time this goes up, it will be Thursday. So tonight is the start of the season, and Eagles Cowboys. So right out of the gates, we're going to find out what the Cowboys look like against the Super Bowl champs. So I think it's going to be really fun. And let me know in the comments what you think on this topic. Oh, and if you're still listening and you're still here, I super appreciate you being here. I know my channel is super tiny and it's new. This is only my second year. And I know you have a lot of options. So if you've landed on this channel and you're still here, I super appreciate you being here. If you do like what I got going on, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. And if you think somebody else would like the channel, share it, but only if you like it. But regardless, I appreciate you being here. And I think that's all I got for today. So I hope this game is good, and I just can't wait for football to start. All right, we'll catch you later.